All right, onward to the next step. So you're supposed to read the first few chapters yesterday. The overview is this diagram. And oddly enough, the diagram doesn't exist anywhere else in the book except the opening. It's supposed to not show you this linear path. It's supposed to be representative of the fact that there's a few things you do at the beginning and a few things you do at the end. And then everything in the middle you can do in whatever order you want. And all those arrows are there to point out to the fact that it's an iterative process where you hit a step, find a flaw, go back some number of steps, make a change, continue back forward. Right? Again, this is the constant iteration. Now, all these chapters are based on conversations I've had with entrepreneurs over the past many years. Right? First and foremost, chapter 1 on why you're doing this. This came about, I was entrepreneur in residence at the University of Washington Center for Commercialization. So this is the department that takes researchers and turns their ideas into startups. And these researchers are incredibly intelligent. They're way deep in these little tiny areas of technology. They've all been grant funded. They've all succeeded at getting grants from the government and elsewhere to do this research. And they get excited about the fact that they want to take this and, what we say, commercialize it, make money out of it. And so we'll sit down with them and they'll go on and on and on for hours at a time talking about their technology. Instead of saying why, I had to stop them over and over again saying, well, why are you doing this business? What's the point? I understand this technology is cool, it's interesting, it's great. But why do you want to turn it into a company? That's hard. That's something different, something you don't know anything about. Why are you doing this? Are you doing this for the money? Are you doing this for the fame? Are you doing this to get your technology used? What's the underlying core purpose of this effort? And at BGI, we kind of start there. There's usually a discussion of purpose of the business before we talk about what the business is. So it's really good when you're first starting and figuring this out for yourself to actually sit down and answer these questions. Why are you doing this? What do you want out of it? Where do you want to be in a few years? What do you want to do? What makes you excited? What gets you up in the morning? Right? Totally applicable. I've been waking up early the past three mornings to come here. This is what gets me up in the morning. Right? I'm not waiting for the alarm clock. I'm thinking about what I'm going to say today. I'm thinking about what we're going to do in the next few weeks. And I'm not tired. And I'll be tired in 10 weeks. Step 2, you guys already have the answer to this. I do meet entrepreneurs all the time who think they have the answers they need and they just can roll forward and find those customers and win. And in almost no case do I ever find an entrepreneur who has all the answers who can do this alone. Right? Almost everybody needs some help. And the more help I find is better, to a point. Step 3, I had this interesting conversation at a coffee shop a few years back. Entrepreneur sits down, starts to tell me about his I'm going to say company, his idea. And there's no excitement whatsoever coming out. And so 5 minutes into it, I just say, stop. I say, there's something missing here. You don't seem to care about this. And then we switch over to his life story, and he's telling me, well, I quit Microsoft to go do this with a friend. And no, you're right, I don't really care about this. I say, well, there's your problem right there. A, you should not quit your job until you have some passion. That was your first mistake. And B, there's no way you're going to get up in the morning and do everything that needs to get done without excitement and passion for the idea. So go tell your friend that you don't care about this one. 2 of you together go find something that matters. Right? Again, starting a company is incredibly hard. It is the hardest thing anyone tries to do except maybe raise kids. Yeah, I do both at the same time. They're all mixed together in my life. It is incredibly hard. It is a crazy thing to do, and so you need something to drive you. You need that passion and that excitement to drive you and get you up in the morning. And there's 5 sub-questions in here. My favorite one in here is if you're not talking about this to all your friends to the point where they don't want to hear it anymore. I know this is happening in Berg's Park. If they're not you're just not that excited. Right? Either that or you're very, very reserved. But you should be talking to your friends, right? You want their help, right? You want their connections and so on. All right, moving on to the meat here. I have met many entrepreneurs that jump right in and talk about their solution. We do X and Y and Z and so forth for all these customers. That's nice. Why are you doing this for your customers? What problem are you solving for them? And again, in my effort at University of Washington and elsewhere, when they did talk about their problem, often we had an hour meeting as a get to know each other, and they would spend the first 45 minutes talking about the problem. We've also seen this in many, many pitch contests and pitch events, where they'll give you, let's say, 6 minutes to talk, and the first 5 minutes is about the problem. And it's a very common space. It's even in the impact space, where someone will stand up there and talk for 3 minutes about global warming. We know there's global warming. That's a one-sentence problem. Hey, there's global warming. Here's a solution. Okay. You need to have it clear in your mind, a separation of what problem you're solving from what solution you're offering the market. This gives you a few, this is important for a few different reasons. First and foremost, as you go down the path and go deeper and deeper into your solution, we'll talk about solution in a few slides, you want to have this touchstone and this core piece to go back to say why on earth you're doing all this. So a great case would be Stockbox Grocers. Stockbox Grocers is a grocery store. It's what it looks like, it's what it smells like, it's what it feels like. They just opened their second one. But that's not why they exist. They don't exist to just serve food like any other grocery store. The problem that they're solving is that there are neighborhoods in Seattle and elsewhere in the world where the people in those neighborhoods do not have access to fresh, healthy food. Right? Often called food deserts. They learned in talking to customers don't like that term, so we try not to use that. So the reason they exist, the problem they're solving, is to bring food to neighborhoods that don't have healthy food. Their solution on how to do that, at the moment, looks like a grocery store. Not necessarily the only solution they'll ever have. It may not be a grocery store in 10 years, it may be something else. When they were tackling this problem, that was the problem that they had, and then they looked at it and said, well, give me 10 different ways to solve that problem. Is it a mobile truck? Is it a food cart? Is it this, is it that? And they landed on grocery store as a solution. But always in the front of their mind is the fact that they're solving the problem of bringing food to neighborhoods that don't have healthy food. So, in your business, one homework assignment for today is describe in a paragraph or two, and a sentence or two, and one sentence, what's your problem? What problem are you solving? What's that space? And sometimes you need to step out one level and say, well, it's not about charging the cell phone. It's about having power off grid. It's not about bringing homes to disaster victims. It's about providing homes, right? Maybe that's it, or maybe it is providing homes, and then one more sentence after that, right? Disaster might be the wrong word, right? It might be slightly bigger than that, slightly smaller than that. You got to find the right level to set up your problem. Once you know what that problem is, you have to realize that it's someone's problem. So it's not necessarily, you can't say that a business has this problem, or that an organization has this problem, or the government has this problem. In all cases, it has to be a single person that has the problem. It could be a group, but you have to be able to say that this person with this job, in this role, in this piece of their life has this problem. Right? Because you got to sell to a person. You can't sell to a company. There's no place to go to sell to a company. It's always a person you have to talk to. So the more you know about this person, the better. Including, do they know they have the problem? So it's often the case that they don't. It's often the case that they do recognize that it is a problem, it's just not an important problem to them. It's not high enough on the list that they're prepared to solve that problem. So a few ways to look at this. This comes from the business model handbook. This comes from the business model generation book, which we'll talk about in I think it's next week. So one way to look at it is pains and gains. So what pain are you solving these people? Or how are you making their life better? Right? Pains are easier to sell against. So if you go to a drugstore and you sit there and you watch what sells, aspirin and ibuprofen and Tylenol, things that solve pains, sell at a much higher rate than vitamins. Right? Because when people have a pain, they want a solution right now. When people want to feel better, well, sometimes they want to feel better, but do they want to feel better right now? Or do they want to feel better later? So we have a challenge in the room on how to sell vitamins to the masses. Another way to look at this is to put that customer in the center of the box and ask, what do they see in the market? What do they hear from others? Right? What are they feeling about this problem? And what do they actually do about it? So this is an empathy map, as they call it. Right? You need to be customer-centric in finding your product. If you're problem-focused or solution-focused, then you're missing that customer. You're not going to hit that. You're not going to get those customers from calling you on the phone. Right? So put yourself in their shoes and answer those questions about who are they. Right? And this goes all the way down to demographics. I want to know male-female ratios. I want to know age groups. I want to know where they live. What do they do? What are their behaviors? Right? If you can make a customer profile that says, my customer is Andy. Andy has 3 kids, a mortgage, 2.5 cars, 4 bikes. Go down that list. This is who I'm selling to. That helps tremendously in later efforts in marketing for these people. All right, any questions on any of that? So step 6. Is this problem worth solving? So is this an important problem in the world? In terms of, there are big problems, right? We talked about this yesterday in the intro, right? There's huge planet scale issues. So I often couch this to say, are you really just saving people $1 or saving people a minute? Or are you doing something important in the world? And in solving those issues, those big important issues, are you actually making things better in total? Right? If it requires you to get on an airplane every day and fly from place to place in order to solve your problem, then there's some negative externalities that you got to add back into your positive internalities and see if it balances in a positive manner. Right? If you are building something in order to save the world, what happens at the end of the life of that product? Right? You got to think through the whole piece so that you're not littering the developing world with batteries. Right? I've seen stories of that all over again. Right? Batteries are ubiquitous. Lots of things are battery powered. Before the modern age, anything they tossed away would biodegrade. So they just have a culture of tossing it aside. Well, batteries don't biodegrade; they sit there. And so there are just batteries all over the place in some parts of the developing world. That's a bad thing. All right, finally we get to your solution. So now that you know what problem you're solving and who's it for, how do you solve this problem? And again, I've had many conversations with entrepreneurs that have gone on for a half an hour or so just talking about the solution. It is incredibly important for you to get down to 2 paragraphs or 1 paragraph or 2 sentences and 1 sentence on what your solution is. And the more complex it is, the harder it is to shrink down to a sentence. And I'm not talking taglines and marketing material yet. We'll get to that later. But just conversation. So we're going to meet a lot of mentors in this program. We're going to be talking to a lot of outsiders. And they're going to ask you what you do. And you should be able to tell them 1 sentence of what the problem is and 1 sentence what the solution is. And then let them ask questions. Right, that's the idea. Maybe 2 of each at most. It's complicated. All right, so how do you find that solution? What's the answer there? Well, an entrepreneur turned academic named Steve Blank came up with a framework to do this in a book called 4 Steps to the Epiphany. This is the same Steve Blank who now is the author of the Startup Owner's Manual And he has an online class, which I mentioned yesterday, based on that, called the Lean Launchpad. In the 4 steps, Steve sets forth the problem statement that the product development model that has been used for 50, 60, 70 years is broken. So the product development model, you may recognize this from Boeing building airplanes or Microsoft building Windows or Office. You do some research, right? You set aside some time and you say, I'm going to research the market, find out what problems they have. You then step back with that research and you design your solution. You then build the solution as a step. This is all sequential. Once you have something built, you go find some customers, call it a beta, and see what they say. Right? They'll find some bugs, they'll give you some feedback, but the product's already built at that point. Right? They're going to get what you get. They're going to get what you built, plus bug fixes and small little changes. Then you launch with a giant hoopla around your launch. Right? I think it's Windows 8 or the Boeing 777. And then at that point, it seems like you hit this big milestone. You hope that what you finally built is what the market wants. And then you repeat the cycle again. In traditional companies, I know this from tech world. In the tech world, back in the .com era, this was 12 to 18 months to do this cycle. Right? And I've gone through this multiple times in many of my companies. The story that's told in the book is Webvan. This is like poster child, worst possible case. So Webvan, if you don't remember it, was home grocery delivery. And what the Webvan people did was they raised a large amount of money, a few $100 million, researched the market to say, yes, people wanted home delivery, right? They did surveys and went and talked to people, and people said, yes, I would like my groceries delivered home. They then hired a large amount of people to sit and build a website with the very rudimentary web tools in the 90s in order to make it so you could sit at home and do web groceries. And then they built a business model that said, all right, month 1 we have 10,000 customers. Well, to service 10,000 customers, we need an automated warehouse. So we're now going to go and buy a warehouse in California, where it's the most expensive place to do this, San Francisco Bay Area. We're going to put in automation in that warehouse to service 10,000 customers. That itself is a big software project. We're going to hire more programmers to program that out. We're going to hire a fleet of vans, paint them with our colors on them. Right? Hire a bunch of drivers, go get them uniforms. It's a whole big thing. By the time they were done, they were at about $800 million of money raised with 200 people on staff. They launched their product, they launched the service, and they got a few hundred customers. Not 10,000. And so they had burnt through, as we said, they had burnt through hundreds of millions of dollars. They had a burn rate, because they had 200 employees, of millions of dollars per month, and they had a few hundred customers to serve. And what they said was, right, they had the product, they just didn't have the customers. And they ultimately had no chance of raising any more money here and went out of business. Right? They got caught up in 2 things. One, the product development model, saying, I know what the answer is, I'm going to go build it, customers will come, field of dreams. And 2, they had this very strong idea that the plan was right. That they sat down and they did all this research, they had all these statistical studies, and they said, our best guess, conservative guess, is 10,000 customers in that first month. And so when they didn't get that, they said, well, the marketing people failed. They did a terrible job. They didn't get those 10,000 customers that the plan said are there. And the salespeople, they failed too, because they didn't close those 10,000 customers that the plan said were there. Right? The truth is they built the wrong product. They spent too much money building the wrong thing. But they just simply believed that the plan was flawed that the plan was executed wrong rather than the plan was flawed. So Steve came up with what he calls the customer development model. So putting customers first. It's a 4-step model. Right? Customer discovery, validation, creation, and then company building. Right? And I'll talk about each of these in order. So customer discovery. Who are they? Who are they? What do they do? Right? Just what I talked about in terms of finding new customers. The difference here is this is just step 1 in in this process. That you're supposed to take the time to go around and talk to customers, but you don't have anything in your hand to give them. Right? You're just trying to find out who they are by having conversations with them. Right? And you can start out in research, so you can start out online. Depending on what business you're in, you can find all sorts of great statistics online. Pew does these great studies of the American populace. Once a quarter they add different questions in that questionnaire. They publish all the data. You can actually tease it out. You can find out by gender and education and household income and whatnot, different aspects of different American people. But ultimately you got to get, as Steve says, get outside the building and go talk to customers face to face. And over the phone and over Skype and surveys and whatnot. Right? You got to talk to a lot of customers, not 3 or 4. Right? If you're doing a widget business or a brick and mortar business, you know, talk to 10 or 20 or 30 customers. If you're doing an online business, then get something up, at least a landing page, and go talk to hundreds of thousands of customers. Right? Make your list of questions on what you want to know and keep iterating on that list as you get better answers. Right? Just keep refining and repeating. So that's what this circle's about. Right? Just keep in that one section until you're comfortable that you've talked to enough customers. Right? Lots and lots of customers. Right? You should have an actual goal in this program of how many customers you're going to talk to each week until you get to the step where you think you've talked to enough. Kind of teased out what you think is the right answer. And then you either keep going or you proceed to the next step. Right? So you're probably there now. You probably already think that you've talked to enough customers that you know that you're ready to move on to the next step, right, before you got here. So the next step is validating that you were right. So in the validation phase, you want to bring at least some marketing material out to these customers and say, well, here's what I'm going to make. Here's the problem, here's the solution. Will you buy this? And you can do the will you buy this in a bunch of different ways. The best way is to pick a price and say, all right, here's what I'm building. Right? Not will be building, not total future tense, but I don't remember what that tense is called. Am building. Right? It will cost $2.99. Would you buy it for $2.99? And you get an answer, yes or no. You'll often find out at that point when you're doing the ask that yes, they see the problem, but it's just not high enough priority that even $2.99 can do it. When you get in these conversations, Steve had one spectacularly bright thing that I had never seen before in this book. He was CEO of Epiphany, play on words for the title of the book. It's a software company for large enterprises. Did something in marketing. It sold for, let's say, $500,000. He would go to his salespeople and he would say, all right, who's going to buy this quarter? And he would take a few names off the top and he would call them. And he would ask them, all right, I hear that you're interested in Epiphany. Would you buy it right now and install it and use it if I give it to you for free? And that seems like a really odd thing to ask. But it answered the question of whether or not they thought it was important enough to do right now. Right? Often the answer was no, which had two learnings in it. One, that their salespeople had happy ears, that they were going to close the deal that they weren't going to close. Right? So sales were going to be lower than expected. And two, it got a gauge of the priority of this product versus all the other products that they're seeing. Right? We'll talk about competition next time, but right, you're out selling something, these customers of yours, other people are selling to them too. So you have to not only have something that they want, you have to have something that they want more than other things that they could buy. Right? You're competing against everything that they're potentially buying right now. So if they said no to free, then he would ask follow-up questions. Well, what else is on your list? I've had this happen in my life. I've been out selling to very large Fortune 500 companies, and they say, that's awesome, we'd love this, in 9 months. And we go, okay, what else is on top of your list? And they would say, well, we got 35 projects. We do about 3 or 4 per quarter. this is good, it's important. I'd say it's about number 10. So, 9 months, you should trickle to the top. And lo and behold, if you do enough of those sales, you find that's true. That some of our sales did take 9 months to close, and some took 18, and some took 36. Very long sales cycle. We just couldn't get it to be a high enough priority for them that every time we went in and they said yes now. All right, Steve did one other thing too. So he also went to these customers, instead of asking them the free question, asked some of them, would you buy for $1 million? Right, twice or 3 times more than it was going to cost. And usually the answer was no, right? Because no, it didn't have that value or they would have charged that much. Every once in a while he got a yes, but that was not the key piece. When he got the no's, the follow-up would be, well then what would you pay for? Or sometimes you'd get the answer of, no, I can't afford $1 million, but I have a budget of 100,000. So you tease out little bits of information like how much money they actually have. And if you got enough conversations, right, you do this 50 times and you get 5 or 6 customers and they say, well, I have a budget of 100,000 or 80,000 or 75, and your product is at $500,000. You now have market information to know that you should make a product, probably make a product that's lower cost to sell to those customers. So that you're missing a bunch of sales. People saying no because they can't afford $500,000, but they could afford 100,000. And that could be 150 or 102. The more conversations you have, the more you'll know. Other paths of validation include online surveys and other ways online to interact with customers. It doesn't always have to be face-to-face. Right? But in all cases, you're not going to get the answer sitting in this building. You're only going to get the answers by talking to people outside this building. Right? And so if you watch the Lean Launchpad, the term "get out of the building" is repeated about 400 times ad nauseam. Right? So just keep going out again. On this phase, answering these questions, you want to go talk to at least the same number of people, if not more, than you did on the first phase. Some same people, but you want some new ideas too. Right? And when you've done that enough and feel like you have enough answers there, then you have 2 paths to follow. Well, you can stick in this little path, but you really have 2 answers. Either you're ready to go to the next step, or you need to go back to the previous step. And that's called a pivot. Right? That was actually named by the next author we're going to talk about. It's called a pivot. Right? Go back to customer discovery, and this product that you thought was perfect for the market's telling you it's not. Let's go find a tweak. Right? Not throw it away altogether. Let's find something else to do, but we've got to go back to customers and talk to them again about this new idea we have before we go and validate it. All right, so once you're through that, then he adds an extra step that doesn't seem natural, right, which is customer creation. So this is what Steve tells you to do. He says, go now make a sales deck without building the product. Go make a sales deck and bring it out and actually ask them to pay for it.
What's a sales deck?
The presentation that you use, create the marketing materials.
Okay.
If we're going to do a sale.
Presentation.
Yeah, the presentation, the 1 sheets, the 2 sheets, the fold-outs.
Okay.
Create the materials as if the product existed. Go and bring it to customers and see if they'll buy it. Go do this, again, out of the building, real customers. Go validate the validation. And, be honest that it doesn't exist. Right? Tell them when it will be in their hands. Try and get pre-purchases. But in doing that, 2 things happen. One, you'll get a lot more feedback on what is actually needed in the product. Right? You may have fleshed out something that's too big, right? That they actually just want these 3 things to start with. You may very much find that you missed something important. That no, when you ask them for that $99, they won't give it to you unless it has 1 more thing in it. That 1 more thing may be 1 different thing for each of the first 100 customers you talk to, in which case you have a problem. If it's the same thing over and over again, or in buckets, well, you can make a roadmap and figure out what it is. This saves you the problem of that waterfall model, that product development model of, you thought you knew what they wanted, you brought it out to the market, and then they tell you, well, you missed something. Okay. So take this step of going out and figuring out what it is that they'll actually buy. And you iterate on this process, of course, over and over again. You iterate on the sales deck, you iterate on the sales process, and you iterate on the product. And then once that is complete, and that could be quick, that could be 10 conversations with 10 customers or 100. Once that is complete, you move on to the last stage, which is actually building the company. As in, going out, raising the money you need, hiring the people you need, building the product that you promised all these customers. And the reason he puts this at the end is it's easy, relatively easy, to go do all those steps if you have 10 customers who say, I'll buy it, or 100 or 1,000. Right? So if you have that list and they've signed a sheet of paper saying, when I've built X, I will buy it for Y dollars. It doesn't have to be the final price, it just has to have a dollar sign in front of it. Right? If you walk up to an investor and say, I got 100 customers that are ready to buy now, I just need, whatever, $50, $100,000, $1 million, size of the investor. That's a much easier conversation to have than to say, the sky's falling. That's a much easier conversation than if you showed them that sales deck and said, well, I think customers want this. Right? So, nonetheless, I think there's a better way to do this, so don't get hung up on it. Right? So that's the customer development model. Steve had one, I don't know what the term is, I guess student would be the right term. He had one student come through his program called Eric Ries, who took this one step further. So how many people here have read the Lean Startup? Half. All right. So Eric was actually working in a company. He got Steve to be a mentor for him, and Steve said, all right, but you have to take my class. And then Eric took this idea and took it 2 steps further, and I think made it much better. So don't get hung up on what Steve does, because he actually uses Eric's terminology. All right, so the point of this Lean Startup has a lot of lessons in it. First and foremost is the idea that you shouldn't be wasting time doing startups. You should be totally focused on finding that right product to bring to market. That's the first and highest priority. Most startups fail not because they haven't brought anything to market, but because they haven't brought the right thing to market. And there's another lesson in here that just says the management of a startup isn't anything like management of an established company. And again, it's that same theory that startups are not little companies, are not little big companies. They're something else. What Eric brought in here is mostly just terminology and clarity. So the clarity is that we should use the scientific method to do business startups. And the scientific method, just to refresh your memory, is you have a hypothesis of what might be true. You test your hypothesis with a test, a measurable test. And if it were true, well, then you're right. Then you continue on that path. And if it was wrong, if the data is against the hypothesis, then you do something else. So there are 2 hypotheses in every business, every startup business. One's called the value hypothesis. That says that there is value in what you're building for the customer. Right? That is that piece that says that customer values the product, as in they'll pay for it. And the second hypothesis is that there are more than one customer. There are a reasonably large number of customers for this value, right? That you can grow. Right? That's it. So your job as startup entrepreneurs is to prove those 2 hypotheses as quickly and easily as possible. Right? So to do that, you got to do iteration. This is why this term iteration keeps coming back in here. So have a hypothesis. I believe people want X, or I believe people have this problem. Go create something that will test that hypothesis. Get it out into the market, measure it, learn from it, and find your next hypothesis. And this is where Eric goes one level deeper than Steve. Eric's core premise is that you shouldn't just be talking to customers theoretically. That you should have an actual product for them to buy in order to have that conversation. Right? And he calls that the minimal viable product. And so minimal as in the smallest possible solution to solve part of that, at least part of that problem. Viable as in they value it and will pay for it. Right? And product is product or service, right? It's just calling it a product. And so this is sometimes, usually a smaller version of what you were thinking. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's an off-the-wall, out-of-the-box idea that will actually just test the hypothesis. For example, you're sitting here in Fledge, which is a 10-week incubator. I did a minimal viable product of Fledge. I forgot to make the slide for it. But I did a minimal viable product of Fledge, which was a weekend workshop. Right, so with the help of the Hub, we ran an event, God, it's not even 2 years yet, a year and a half ago called Societ Weekend, where we got entrepreneurs in the room to create businesses in a weekend, socially minded businesses. And in doing that product, I actually surveyed the crowd. So I had 120 sheets of paper with check boxes on them in pen saying I want a business incubator. So I kind of did step one of the customer development model in person with 60 people in the room. And separately, I had 50 hours in this program to talk to them and ask them if they wanted an incubator. We did interviews, we did all sorts of market research on this crowd, and the fun part is they paid us to come. We actually made money doing market research. And that proved that there was a market for this program. Right. Groupon, you've all heard of Groupon, is actually, you may not be aware, it's the fastest growing company of all time in terms of revenue. They since hit the peak and come back down, but it was the fastest company to $500 million in revenue ever in the history of mankind. What you may not know is that that was not their main business. Groupon, as you know it, is Plan E or Plan F or Plan G. It was one of the things they threw on the wall to see what would stick. This one happened to stick. They didn't build, right? So Groupon looks like this online, complicated marketplace of deals. You know, today it looks like a mobile app and a website and a newsletter. It didn't start that way. It started with a WordPress site that was built by hand, a database that was off the shelf, really cheap, low-end database. And then anytime anyone bought anything, there was a human being that would go into the database, put in an entry, spit out a PDF that would get put into an email manually and emailed out. They did this for a long time. That was their minimal viable product. They could put up one deal on the web via WordPress. And that was sufficient to prove to them and to their investors and employees that it was going to work. So they did not go down and hire a large number of people to build Groupon like you know it today. And same thing with Zappos. So Zappos sold to Amazon for $1 billion, right? This biggest online shoe store ever. First online shoe store, or first successful online shoe store. But when I think it's Tony started Zappos, it was unclear whether anyone would buy shoes over the internet. That was an untested hypothesis. So instead of building a complicated website and going out and buying shoes, which you'd think would be needed to do a shoe store, he went to his local shoe stores in his neighborhood, I don't remember where in the world that was, with his camera. And he simply asked them, can I take a picture of your inventory? And I'm going to post it online, and if I sell it online, can I come in and buy a pair of shoes? He didn't even ask for a discount. He may or may not, but it doesn't matter. Discount was irrelevant. He just wanted to prove in this test that people would buy shoes. He then set up the Zappos website, probably on WordPress, and offered the shoes there with the same return via mail that's kind of the key to the business. It worked. With that proof, he then went off and built the product. But first and foremost, he built almost nothing.
Can I
Yes.
ask a question about this
Yeah.
specific one? I don't want to be annoying, but I've listened to this like 45-minute lecture from Tony on
Okay.
his story, and apparently he hit some plateau where he realized regardless of this idea, if he didn't have more inventory than anyone else, he couldn't make it work. And
Okay.
so he sold like 19 of his 20 real estate investment properties and put millions of dollars all into the
Sure.
inventory.
So this is I'd say this MVP proved the value hypothesis, and then on the growth side, he learned once he had that up and running
Mhm.
That, oh, well, it's growing, but it's not hitting a hockey stick. What's making it fail, that hockey stick? What's not making that hockey stick? And he had a hypothesis that I need more inventory. That I need more inventory than I could possibly have in a warehouse. I need to do some sort of direct shipping model or something else on the back end, right? If you remember the story of Amazon back in the late 90s, one of their original hypotheses was that they would not have warehouses. That all those books, back when they were just a bookseller, would just be drop shipped by the publisher. And that didn't work. Right? I don't know exactly why, but for whatever reason in that back end, it did not work as a business. And therefore they buckled down and built out these warehouses, and now they're one of the biggest retailers in the country based on their own warehouses, to the point where they sell the service of those warehouses to others. Right? So that turned out to be a profit-making move. Great story is also in the book for Village Laundry. So here's a company based in India. They had the hypothesis that laundry was being done. Let's try this again. They had this hypothesis that in India, the traditional way of doing laundry was that you handed your clothes to a washerwoman. She would take them. She would take them off for 48 hours, wash them in the nearby stream or lake or whatnot, bring them back to you clean. They said, well, it's the 21st century, we should be able to do this with modern technology, make it more convenient for people. So they had a hypothesis, we'll go buy one of those ubiquitous white Toyota pickup trucks. We'll get a generator, some water, and get a modern laundry machine. We'll bring it to the villages, and we'll test it out. Right? As opposed to just going out to the villages and asking them about laundry. Right? So it cost them a few $100s to get this all set up. They go out to the village, and what they learn? They learned that no one would trust them because they were handing them to a company that had a truck. And they were afraid, for whatever reason, that they were going to drive away with their clothes and they'd never see them again. And what's great about this story is that is never something you would unlikely to learn by having conversations with people. You get pictures of trucks and whatnot. It doesn't have the same visceral reaction as walking up to a truck with all the stuff in the back and just saying, I'm not sure my clothes are coming back. So what they did is their second iteration was that they built out a kiosk that fit in the truck that they could take off the back of the truck. So exactly, it's the same business. It's movable. It just has the piece that people see doesn't have wheels. Right? They learned that by being in the market, right, for a few $100s. All right, so everybody in the room uses Dropbox, right? Most likely, you probably used it yesterday too. What was their MVP? So just to be clear, they were part of Y Combinator, which is a 12-week accelerator program in California. Right? They had 12 weeks. They came in with this idea of sharing files. They had no code written yet. Right? So what did they do for their MVP? Anybody know the story? Anybody want to make a guess? Not you, for instance.
It took 18 months to actually formally launch. I don't remember what we did to start.
And what year was this? Because I'm running in my head, when did Box.net launch too?
After them.
After
After them. A year or two after them. Dropbox must have been, I don't know, 07, 08.
Did they have like a communal cardboard box in the office?
That's not, so just the camera gets it. So the idea was perhaps they had a box, a physical box that people put stuff into. That would be on the right path to prove the hypothesis. They took it one step simpler. They made a video. Okay? So all they did for part of their 12 weeks, however many this took, is they made a video of what it would do if they had built it. Right? And you can see in the video it's talking about sharing files across all these different devices. They put it up on a one-page website, right, Dropbox.com, with a place to put your email address in. And 4 or 5 months ago, it was still there. It's not there. I checked it yesterday. It's gone now. And 20,000 people signed up. So talking about that development model, 20,000 people said, I want this product. And it's a freemium product, so they weren't asking anyone to pay to start with. But walking at the end of that program, walking around saying I have 20,000 people ready to sign up, after probably 6 weeks. That was an easy sell to an investor to get the $500,000 needed to build. They're now a $4 billion company. Right? They're worth $4 billion last time they raised money. Right? So, point is, you don't necessarily have to build a small version of your product. We saw that again with Fledge. We didn't really build the incubator program. We did a weekend event. Dropbox didn't build anything in terms of code. Neither did Arrow. So this one came along. This is an actual company launched in Seattle a few months back in the midst of the last Fledge class. So Arrow had an idea that companies here would like a convenient way to get down to San Francisco. There's a lot of companies that are in both cities. And so they said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to buy a few of these planes. These are fast prop planes. Right? These are propellers, just to be clear. They fly almost as fast as jets. They would take off from Boeing Field, fly down to, I think it was San Jose Airport. I don't think it was San Francisco. It would take slightly longer than flying in a jet while you're in the air, but their website, which I'll show you in a second here, was showing that, you know, if you took the normal jet, it would take you X hours. If you took our flight, it would actually take you half as long. Because there's no security lines at Boeing Field, there's no security lines when you get off. There's no issues. Right? Your bag's just there when you get off in San Jose. It would be convenient. They had this model that was different than an airline. They said, well, we want a subscription model. So we want, how does it work out? We want companies to sign up for $500 a month to be part of Arrow, and then buy seats for, I think it was $1,000 round trip, which is way more than flying commercial. Just to be clear, they didn't buy any airplanes before they did this. They did an MVP. They built a website, 2 or 3 pages of marketing material, and they made it explicit. If X number of companies sign up, then we'll buy an airplane. Right? So people knew they were pre-buying. Right? They launched it. It was covered by the local press, and 2X companies signed up, more than they expected. But more importantly, so they just turned around and said, all right, we'll buy 2 planes, except we have to change our model. Because half the companies that signed up said they want to reserve Mondays and Fridays. And we don't think our model works if we allow them to reserve Mondays and Fridays, so the other half of the companies can only fly during the middle of the week. That's not it's not a fair model, and B, we don't think it scales. So they did an MVP publicly, simply, it took them weeks. And I believe they're up and running now. Right? And they did 1 test flight, just to show what it would be like. Right? So kind of MVP plus, just as a sales tool. They rented the plane for a day, flew down to San Francisco and back. Another one I keep talking about is Stockbox Grocers. So they're solving the problem of bringing food to neighborhoods that don't. So their original hypothesis, the reason this looks like a shipping container, is their original hypothesis for solving that problem was to refurbish shipping containers, put them in a existing parking lot in a neighborhood that didn't have a grocery store. And so they prototyped that. So they graduated 2 years ago. They rented this isn't a shipping container, this is actually a portable office for construction. They decorated it inside and out. I have pictures from the inside, but not here. Right, it looked like a little grocery store on the inside. They put it down in a parking lot in an apartment complex in a low-income neighborhood in Seattle that has no grocery stores. For 2 months. And at the end of 2 months, they knew a lot more about running a grocery store than they had when they started. They knew a lot more about the neighborhood than they knew. And they knew exactly which products sold in a small format grocery store. Because they measured everything. So in the point of sale system, we could see exactly how many people bought bananas and orange juice and whatnot. There's 300 products in this store. With that knowledge, they went out, raised money, and opened up the first store. Well, the first store actually has walls. Right? It's a stick-built building in a different neighborhood. Because when they went out to go and find a location, well, it turns out they found a location that was about the right size in a neighborhood that needed this. And so they opened the first one there. That's been open for a year and a little bit, right? And then the second grocery store is now 4 times bigger. So there again, we're looking around for where to open the second and third and fourth stores, and discovered that there's a neighborhood that is a few blocks away from downtown with a large population and no grocery stores. The nearest grocery stores are in the next neighborhood over. All right, so your homework is clearly going to be make an MVP, right? If you don't already have one, and if you already have one, then make sure you have your plan B and plan A prior. What happens if that one doesn't quite work? What happens if it does work? And the idea is to continue doing this cycle as quickly as feasible for your business. Right? So in the tech world, you can do these things rather quickly. Facebook, right? Most people here have used Facebook. Ships a product every Tuesday. But just to be clear, Facebook changes every Tuesday, 50 times a year. They take off Christmas and one other week during the year. Which means they have the opportunity to put something out into the market and see how it performs 50 times. And if their competitor, and this might have been one reason that they beat out MySpace. So imagine MySpace, I don't know their cadence, but imagine they did it once a month. They got 12 learnings a year. Facebook got 50. Who's going to learn more? Back in my world as selling large companies, I put a line in the sand and said, we're going to ship once a month. Or actually, it wound up being once a quarter. 4 times a year. Well, 4 times a year is a whole lot better than once a year, which was the previous cadence that I've been working on. But it's nowhere near 50. So depending on what your business is and how you do this, what is your natural cadence and how can you push it a little bit quicker? Right? Again, I'll use Pledge as an example. This is the 3rd cohort. This is the 9th time I've taught this material. Right? It's not the only place I teach this material. All the places where I work with entrepreneurs, all the extra workshops I've thrown in on top of that makes this material better and more useful to all the entrepreneurs I work with. Right? I try, and that's nine times in 2 years.
So it sounds like this strategy is not just for startups, it's for once you have a business and you become, and you have, you stay competitive, it sounds like. It's when it started, it's not just a startup strategy, it's like a business strategy.
So once you, use this for, yes, so there are big companies that are starting to adopt the lean startup methodology because it makes for a more competitive company. Right? But since we're all sitting here with startups, let's just focus on the startup part. And then don't lose the philosophy as you get bigger.
Yeah.
Right? You may slow down, but try not to. Right? We'll talk about that in many weeks. When the Facebook person stood up and said this in Seattle, the Amazon person in the room stood up and said, 50 times a year, we ship every 6 seconds. Okay? Amazon's a much bigger software-based, much bigger set of services, whereas Facebook is sitting on everything's in one product. Right? Everything ships at one time. Amazon is distributed, and so different parts of Amazon change all the time. So something in Amazon is changing every 6 seconds. At Google, it's also split into multiple parts. They're running hundreds of tests right now. So when I do a Google search and you do a Google search, despite the fact we're in the same room, in the same network, right, we may get different results. And not just because you can turn off all the personalization, we may get different results because you're in one set of tests that they're running and I'm in a different set. And when I say test, they test every pixel on the screen. They've tested to see what happens if there's 52 pixels between the logo and the box or 51 pixels. They've tested in what happens if we take a word off the front page. The more people search, or less people search. Right? They have such a huge user base that they can just set aside a few tens of thousands of people to do tests all day long and see what the results are. It's much harder to do in a startup. Much, much harder to do, but you still have to figure out how to do those tests. And the final piece of the lean startup is Eric is proposing that the right measure of success at a startup is not users or customers or revenues or any of the normal math, financial metrics. It's validated learnings. How many things have you learned in the past week and month and quarter and year? I've yet to find anyone who manages a company that actually uses this stat, but it's a really good theoretical basis. So, in short, what have you learned about your business in the past day, in the past week, in the past month? What have you changed since then via those learnings? And then the final quote is Thomas Edison, who was a lean startup guy. Right? So remember the story. He didn't invent the light bulb. He invented the first light bulb that worked. And how did he do it? He did it by testing, I don't remember what the number was, 3,000 different materials to find the one that worked best. Right? Many of them worked. If you just take something and stick it in a vacuum and throw electricity through it, most of them will blow up. Most of them will burn up, despite the vacuum. He just found the one that happened to work best, which, just to be clear, is not the one we use, well, I can't say it now, because these are LEDs, not the one we used 10 years ago. That's tungsten. The one he found was based on carbonized cotton. Right? So the solution he found was not actually the ideal solution that we used for the next 100 years. It was one that was almost as good. All right, so we've gone through problem, solution, and customer this morning. Right? The other lesson is figure out what your hypotheses are. Right? You're going to sit down and actually make them explicit. And your next steps, based on this lesson, are to go talk to customers. So put a line in your book saying, I'm going to talk to, put a number down, customers this week. Right? We're sitting here on a Tuesday. Gives you lots of time to go talk to customers. Number two, what is your MVP? What are you going to get out into the market to go test? Or if you've already put something in the market, what's the next thing? Unfortunately, Eric didn't give us a name for what the next thing is after MVP. Second MVP, right? Iteration 2. And then have a plan for how you're going to get that MVP in front of those customers as soon as possible. But when is that? Right? So, again, in terms of Fledge, we have 10 weeks here. You should have a plan of getting an MVP in front of your customers sometime in the middle of that program, so that you can either do it again in the second half of the program, or at least report back on stage what it is you learned, right, during that test. Right? Speed is of the essence. The more iterations you can put in is better. And so, spend the day and ponder how to either do this in a focused manner. I got one MVP with one hypothesis in there or two. I'm going to go get that out now. Or you may come back and say, well, there's actually 3 different ways I'm thinking of doing this. How can I possibly do 3 smaller things, either wrapped into one event or one product, or 3 separate ones? And do the spaghetti model. Let's try 3 things really quick. Let's go get 10 customers for 3 things and report back at the end and say, all right, I tried 3 things. This is the one that worked best. Here's why I'm going forward with it. In all cases, what you want to be able to say at the end of the program is that I looked at all these possibilities and I'm convinced that this is the right answer because I've talked to end customers and they are all ready to buy it as soon as it's ready. And that's the ideal. Any questions on any of that?